Hello everyone, welcome back to the French MotoGP Podcast. That was a pretty incredible weekend that we had in Le Mans. Joining me, of course, is Rob Jones and Pete McLaren. Pete, what a weekend that was. Jorge Martin stamping his authority back on the World Championship, after that mistake in Jerez. Marc Marquez delivering two incredible performances in the sprint and the Grand Prix. Where do we start with that? It was just a pretty epic weekend overall, wasn't it?
It was, wasn't it? Yeah, it was the battle we've been waiting for, really, wasn't it? Between the top two guys of recent years and the guy who's won more championships than anyone else on the grid. We were robbed of it a little bit to Jerez when Martin fell. Maybe we could have seen it there, but here we are 2 weeks later. And let's face it, there was nothing between them, really. If you reran those last couple of laps 3 times, you'd probably get 3 different winners, wouldn't you? So yeah. Ultimately, it was Pecco that lost out, given that he finished third and had been leading a lot of the race. But then I guess he went into those last couple of laps. He was in the difficult position, wasn't he, in second? He had to attack and defend, whereas Martin's just thinking, hold on to the lead, defend. Marquez is just thinking attack. So, and maybe also paid the price, Pecco, this is, for the sprint race, not getting the data there, not knowing how his bike would be on tyres and everything else in a real race situation. But either way, great battle between them. And Marquez got a bit of revenge, didn't he, for the pass in Jerez. So, let's hope we see more of it.
Yeah, exactly. Rob, as Pete says, it could have been so many different outcomes if you had run it so many different times. But, you think of Jorge Martin, that maybe one of his best weekends ever in MotoGP, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the press conference post-race, he sort of alluded to Misano last year still being sort of the top race in his mind. But I mean, Pete said it best. The performance he had all weekend, he dominated the sprint. Even when he faced a bit of pressure from Bezzecchi, who ramped up the pace, Martin responded. Obviously, in the Grand Prix, Bagnaia made a much better start, took the lead. But you could always tell Martin was comfortable. He was just sort of, sitting back, judging Bagnaia's pace when he sort of needed to make the move. Tried with, I think, 8 laps to go. And we saw Bagnaia's brilliance in defence again. But then, same corner, next lap, Martin just got it perfectly. And at that point, it almost felt like he was going to be able to pull away and create a bit of a gap. And he did create a very, very small gap. But then Bagnaia what you can only say is a bit of a champion's ride. Although he ended up being third, you could see out of the 3, Bagnaia had a little bit less pace, but he stuck there and tried to do everything he could. And then there was that mistake, I think, with about 3 laps to go. Coming out of the chicane, Martin went a bit deep. And then Bagnaia tried it into turn 5, and you thought that was going to be either Bagnaia retaking the lead or the opening for Marquez to even try and get both riders or slip into second. Incredible racing by all 3, but Martin, to deliver that sort of weekend is impressive, but to do it after Jerez, to show again to Ducati, I had a very small blip, but look what I've done. And he said it again post-race with Marc and Pecco next to him. He said I was number 1 this weekend, and he did prove it.
He did, yeah. It's the confidence from him, Pete. I've really noticed the difference in him. Maybe last year he was always kind of playing catch up, as you say. He would get the lead in the World Championship, then a mistake would happen, and then he would always be back to square one. But this year it's a complete flip. He started so strong. Yeah, he had the mistake in Jerez, but this weekend to just essentially grow his championship lead out to 38 points now over Pecco, 40 over Marc and Enea Bastianini. He's got nothing left to prove to Ducati, does he? It's like he said, this is what I can do. I'm the number 1 this weekend, right in front of the world champion Marc Marquez in a press conference, which it takes some confidence to say. And yeah, Ducati are going to have a very difficult decision to make, aren't they?
They are, absolutely. I mean, how do you turn away the guy leading the World Championship? That's going to be a tough one. And let's be honest, you mentioned the lead there, 38 points. So that means that he's going to be leading, even if he doesn't even turn up in Catalonia. So he's going to be leading the World Championship into Mugello the following round, whatever happens in Barcelona. The following round being Mugello, home race for Ducati, and that time when we're sort of told the decision will be announced. We don't know if it's already been made or not, but we're hearing Mugello, isn't it? Don't know if it's before the race, after the race, but that's the sort of period where we're hearing Ducati will announce who will get the seat alongside Pecco. So, Martin's going to be leading going into that event. We already know that now because his lead is so big in the points. So, he's making it difficult for Ducati to turn him away, isn't he? Let's be honest. And I guess, and also Mark is up there now, isn't he? He's very close to Pecco in the standings as well. So, as I say, this battle between those three, this could be, and I think Pecco might have said this after the race, this could be the championship battle looking forward.
It could be, yeah. And I said to Rob before we start recording, if you took Martin out of the championship battle, if you looked at second, third, fourth, and fifth in the championship, there'd be 10 points between them. So it's like literally, Martin has just been so consistent, and yeah, he has made a mistake. But like when you look at it now, if he hadn't made that mistake in Jerez, what would his championship lead be? He's riding just in the best form that he can, and I was really interested with his comments over the weekend. He said, Ducati, they know what I could do essentially, but he did make reference. I think he was speaking to Dorna after the sprint, and he said that if they don't want me, I'll take my talent somewhere else, and I'll show someone that. And I was like, well, that's the first hint that I've kind of heard of him saying, I will take it somewhere else. Then, yeah, I do want the factory Ducati seat, but there's other options maybe for him. So could that be an Aprilia? Who knows? But yeah, I wouldn't want to be Ducati, so I wouldn't want to be, because like we're going to talk about Marc Marquez, who had a very difficult qualifying, Rob, and that essentially was his weekend. We're always playing catch up, but he performed miracles in the sprint on that first lap to finish second, and then he does the exact same again on the last lap of the Grand Prix to overtake Pecco to finish second. A brilliant weekend from him, wasn't it?
Yeah, phenomenal. I mean, obviously on Friday you could visibly see the struggles, especially when he tried to push on his push laps, the time attack. He just wasn't comfortable. There was mistakes creeping in. He obviously had the crash in the final sector. So he's never really comfortable. It sort of seemed Saturday morning that he made an improvement, but going through Q1 is always a bit of a lottery. And obviously Oliveira put that lap late on. I think Mark got stuck with the yellow flags, and I thought it seemed like Oliveira's lap might get deleted as well, because you weren't too sure where the riders were at those different points. But obviously the laps, was valid and stood, and obviously Marquez was eliminated. But I think there was always that thought that come the race, how much progress he was going to make, we didn't know. But that first lap, it was shades of Bagnaia in Jerez when he went going into the chicane around the outside of three riders, including Quartararo, Jack Miller, very fast riders who are also very, very good on the brakes. And he just swooped around the outside, and it just set his race up perfectly. Going into Sunday, I think we all probably thought, again, he'll move forward, but it's maybe like one of those once every few month type of performances. Yeah. You're not going to be able to replicate it, especially the next day. And he did just that, because it's not like a lot of riders crashed out in front of him. I think there was only one rider who crashed out in front of him.
Bezzecchi, I think,
in the early laps. But his pace, and to not only move through the pack, with everything that's going on in terms of tyre pressures overtaking in MotoGP at the moment, to achieve the results he did, to overtake as many riders as he did, and then still close in on Martin and Bagnaia, who were setting unbelievable lap times. It just showed again that adaptation to the Ducati is over, and a win is just around the corner. I think he's the next rider who hasn't won a race this season to win.
Yeah,
he was phenomenal again. And again, to your point about Martin making it difficult for Ducati, those comeback rides from Marquez, with everything else in terms of his appeal, the brand that he is, you could easily see why Ducati would go with Marquez as well. And Martin even hinted at that on Thursday in the press conference, saying, I would understand if they went for an 8-time world champion.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Actually, it's not even like Marquez's results are bad. That's the thing. It's like he's got the market inside, he's got the fan base, he's got the results that are coming now in the races. I feel sorry for Jorge Martin, to be honest. It's like, if Mark was still on a Honda this year, there'd be no worries. He'd be on that factory bike. It'd be signed, I reckon, who knows, could have been signed at the start of the year for everyone. Like, it could have been that easy. But yeah, as Rob says, Pete, Marc Marquez, towards the end of that Grand Prix yesterday, I think he was even surprised how much he had left in the tank in terms of pace, because when he seen the Bagnaia and Martin weren't really getting away from him, and then they started engaging with around 8 laps to go, and he started eating into the lead then, because he could see, hang on, I've got a bike to go win this race. It was just one of those races, wasn't it, where it was a perfect sort of ending to it.
Yeah, that's it. I think he said this afterwards. He expected Pecco to attack, didn't he? He thought that Pecco was going to go for Martin, and you could probably imagine Mark's thinking, "This is great. Those two will push themselves wide, and I'll just cut underneath, take the win." And then, of course, he realizes that's not going to happen. And then he has to go for the move on Pecco himself. And a great outbreaking, clean move, gets second place. And I'm sure, with hindsight, as we said, if he reran it, he'd have attacked Pecco sooner and given himself a bit of space to go for Martin, because he was certainly close enough. And coming from 13th on the grid, using that extra energy, that extra tyre, all that kind of stuff to go through all those riders. He was, 8th on the first lap or something? So he still had quite a lot of people to pass, didn't he, to get up there? And that takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of strain out of the bike and the tyres. But it's going to be a big confidence boost for him, I think, to know that he can go into a weekend now. We know this was, let's face it, his weakest Friday of the year, his toughest event at the start. And yet, by the sprint race, he had the pace to fight for the win, didn't he? And that's what he said. He said he was more delighted with that after the sprint than he was the start in the sprint, wasn't he? Because he realised the pace is there. So he now has that confidence in his team, led by Frankie Carcetti, that if they do have a tough time at a track on a Friday, they can turn it around quickly. And I think that's a big thing for him, because he hadn't really had this sort of tough time. I suppose really maybe the Sepang test, the first day at the Sepang test, they had a lot of technical issues. So slightly different reasons, but they were on the back foot at the start. And again, then they came through when they were strong by the end of the Sepang test. This was a bit like that. And to catch up to those guys who, let's face it, they're on a different bike. They're on the GP24. And, there's no way that Ducati has got slower with a year's worth of development on the newer bike. I think he said the acceleration, wasn't it? He thought the acceleration, that was where those guys were gaining on him. And, fair play to Martin. He doesn't make a big thing of the difference, but there clearly is going to be a difference. That being said, Bezzecchi, who I think you're going to come on to, Jordan, he was putting the pressure on Mark, wasn't he? He was the top 23 rider for much of the weekend, much of those races. So Mark didn't have it his own way again, as we saw at Jerez. There's some other guys, Didier was up there as well, who are also now coming onto form with the 23 bike.
Yeah, we'll come on to the VR46 bikes. Actually, we'll start on it now. In the race, obviously the Grand Prix, the pivotal point actually probably for Marquez not getting up to Bagnaia and Martin was that battle he had with Gian Antonio for those 3 laps, where I think the gap was at 1.5, and then they had a bit of a tussle at turn 1 that went right up to 2.3. So there was, it was near second lost there, and you kind of think, well, if Mark had cleared him quicker, maybe he could have got up with maybe 4 laps to go and really put the pressure on Pecco then. But the GP23s this weekend, as Pete said, they were very strong. Alex Marquez didn't have a great weekend, but when you look at the VR46 bikes, a better weekend for them. Obviously with Bezzecchi, 2 crashes. He fell out of second place when Mark was pressuring him in the sprint, and then the Grand Prix yesterday, just losing the front at the bottom of the hill. It's progress though, isn't it, for them?
Massive progress. To both be on the second row was already a good starting point. We sort of saw the flashes from Bezzecchi and Jerez. And then he was very, very fast in the sprint. That can't be forgotten. He was applying pressure to Martin, who did have the answers eventually. Disappointing though for Bezzecchi, because it's a case of now he's sort of understanding how to ride that GP23 and he's getting more comfortable. But those mistakes are going to hurt him. We all know he's not in contention for that factory Ducati seat next season. Yeah. But last season he was extremely strong, and he won Le Mans last year, so obviously a track that he goes well at. But to get nothing out of the weekend, given the pace he had, won't sit right with him. Obviously, good races coming up for him with Mugello coming up after Catalonia. He should be really strong there. You'd think with another round, that adaptation to the 23 bike will be sort of complete for him. It was good to see Gian Antonio after the way he ended last season, sort of back in the mix.
Yeah.
And he did not want to give up against Marquez. You could see the commentary sort of highlighted it. The way Marquez has been racing against not only obviously the whole field throughout his career, but the Ducati guys since he's joined Ducati. You could sort of feel Gian Antonio was trying to give as much as whatever Marquez was dishing out, Gian Antonio was going to dish it out too. But there was that point where, and Marquez, you could tell, he knew how important it was to make that move immediately, because when they went through the chicane, he sort of squeezed Gian Antonio to the inside.
Yeah, to put him
Mark
there.
Wide. Vinales nearly came through. And then obviously the following lap, Gian Antonio got the chicane wrong, outbraked himself, had to give up 4th place. And a good weekend in terms of pace, much better. Good to see Gian Antonio score some good points. I think he was 5th at the flag, 9 seconds off the win.
He was 6th at the flag, yeah. But like you say, he was He was great, so he was, and I
Yeah.
think if he continues that, I don't know where his future lies, because we've got a lot of situations with Pramac. Are they going to switch to Yamaha machinery? Where's that going to place Fermin Aldegar? Where's that? Digi needs to perform, and I think this is a good time of the year to start doing it. So,
You'd like to think with Di Antonio as well, that's the sort of rider he is. He sort of builds up into it. We saw last
exactly.
year how much stronger he got, and I think it's only going to be the case this season. He will get better as the season goes on, and then start challenging for those podiums.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Pete, I want to talk about speaking of Ducati, Pecco Bagnaia, of course. He had a great qualifying session, but then was ruined by, obviously he was second on the grid, but the crash that he had in qualifying just completely ruined his sprint, really. The first bike was damaged, and he had to switch to that second, and then he had that absolute disastrous first lap where the electronics, well, I don't think Ducati have officially said it's the electronics, but what Pecco has said, yeah, that bike was trying to throw him off at every opportunity, wasn't it?
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? It's the third time this has happened with a factory team where the spare bike, there's been something wrong with it, isn't there? We saw it with Vinales in Kota, that his B bike, as he called it, had an issue. Then we saw it with Brad Binder this weekend, where he crashed his favoured bike, and then he had technical problems in qualifying. And then we see it with Bagnaia, as you say, he crashed in qualifying as well, and then had some sort of issue, which sounds, as you say, electronic engine, something like that, because he was talking about both ends of the bike. So, if it was just the rear or just the front, then maybe you'd think maybe a tyre. But he seems to be having issues with both ends. So something sort of fairly fundamental went wrong. But yeah, I mean, that was interesting that we're seeing these. It's not normal, is it, for certainly factory teams? They're absolutely top class quality that. The guys in those teams, normally the bikes, there's very little difference. There's always going to be some differences between the two bikes, but usually there's not let's say a technical issue. It's quite rare, but it does show how complex these bikes are these days. And I suppose on the good side for Ducati, no chatter this weekend, and again they're up front dominating. But we saw, I think KTM did have a bit this weekend, as they had in Jerez. So Ducati have had two events now without the chatter. And look, they're at the front again. So that seems to be a big thing for them. If they can avoid that, maybe they've dialed it out now. They've got a setting that keeps away from it. It shows that they're going to be tough to beat in those circumstances. So Barcelona, the next round, that will be a big one, because that's low grip, and that's where, for the Ducatis, they think they get the chatter with the low grip. With KTM, it seems like it's the higher grip. But be a big event, Barcelona, for them, because I think that will show once and for all if they have got on top of that chatter issue and again, sort of at the top of the timesheets.
Yeah. How important do you think it was, Pete, for Bagnaia to? I know he's very good at putting it at the back of his mind, but jumping on his number one bike again, and he made a great start, as Rob said. How important was that for him to just kind of? He salvaged a really good result, even though he wanted second. Being third, still a pretty impressive performance, wasn't it? After what happened.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the one thing that no rider wants is two bad races in a row, isn't it? I mean, that really starts to then eat at your confidence and everything else. And we saw it with Marc Marquez. He fell at Kota, then he fell in the Jerez sprint, and even Marc said, when he was battling with Pecco the next day, he couldn't afford to make it 3 crashes in 3 races. So as you were talking previously about Martin, he'd had the bad race in Jerez. He comes back, he puts it behind him. Pecco has the bad sprint in Jerez, comes back, puts it behind him. He has a bad sprint in Le Mans, comes back, puts it behind him. So that's great, but he's got to stop having the bad races. I know it's not his fault, the technical issue in the sprints, and obviously at Jerez there was the Binder move. But yeah, it seems like things keep happening to him, and that will be a bit of frustration that he's not able to get, like Martin, a perfect weekend in, because the points lead is growing, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and the Thursday press conference, Pecco had said that like 2 truths and a lie, and he says, I really like the sprints, and one of them, which turned out to be the lie, so he doesn't really like sprint races from what he said, but which is a surprise, because at the start of last year, he was kind of the person at the start who was winning most of the sprints, so I don't know what's going on with Pecco in sprint races, but I think he will have a better one in Barcelona. And then Bastianini in 4th, Rob, and the Grand Prix. Again, his weekend was very strange. A lot of issues on Friday. Saturday was a bit sort of scrappy for him. He had issues with yellow flags and stuff. Qualified in 10th, but he showed fantastic pace in the Grand Prix to finish 4th. And we said, actually, that if he didn't have that long lap penalty, he could have been in that fight for the lead, couldn't he?
Yeah, he could have, because I mean, we think a long lap penalty is roughly around 3 seconds, and he finished the race 2.2 off the win. It's quickly becoming the theme with Bastianini, his pace at the end of races, but particularly this weekend. I think as good as Martin was, Bastianini was potentially the fastest rider this weekend. There's arguments to be made for that, and he sort of showed that towards the end of practices, in Q1, his lap time was phenomenal, and he was only going to get stronger. But obviously, yellow flags, crashes, and then not quite taking advantage of the start. Obviously he was down the order, but you saw Marc 3 places behind him, both times able to make progress quicker in the races. That's where it's the only sort of problem Bastianini is having at the moment, is he can't seem to make that progress at the beginning of races, and it's holding him back, and he's just giving himself a little bit too much to do. We obviously still think he's maybe holding on to very small chance of being in that Ducati sort of fight for the factory seat.
Yeah.
I think we can probably all agree that his chances have probably gone now, which is sad and a shame for him, because in the championship you mentioned those riders who from 2nd to 5th are within 10 points. Bastianini is one of them, and he's been very consistent this season. He's not had many crashes, and he's been extremely fast. He's just every weekend, because Martin's delivering, because Marquez is delivering, Bagnaia is taking Grand Prix wins here and there. Bastianini is fast, but he just doesn't have those results to warrant being in that discussion. And I think, again, Le Mans was a case where it should have been at least one win potentially. And he came away without either. Struggled to get Vinales in the sprint, did it in the Grand Prix. But it just feels like it's slowly slipping away. Although he is fast, he's just not able to deliver the results for one reason or another.
Yeah, it is. It's a real shame, actually, because he's doing a great job, and it's 2 4th place finishes the weekend. That's a really good weekend for anyone usually, but and then needs to be winning races, I think, and it's came maybe a bit too late, and it's such a shame after what happened last year, because we never got to see it really from him because of the injuries. He struggled to adapt to the bag. He did get that win last year in Sepang, but I think it's circumstantial. He needs to be strong in qualifying, and when he's starting 2nd, 3rd row, it's just not good enough sometimes. I think he struggles early on in the races with the fuel tank, and he just can't really, show his true pace from the start. But, I think wherever Enea ends up, it'll be a good seat anywhere, because he's a fantastic rider. He's level on points with Marc Marquez, and yeah, he can't do anything else. It's just circumstantial. Martin's riding the best he's ever rode. Marc Marquez is having an unbelievable resurgence, so Enea Bastianini's just caught in the wrong place. But who knows what his management have? I'm sure Pernat has something up his sleeve for him. So we'll see, and we'll probably hear something in the next few weeks. Pete, I want to talk about Maverick Vinales. I thought it was a very good weekend for him. Maybe in the Grand Prix could have delivered more, but he finished 3rd in the sprint and 5th in the Grand Prix. That's a good weekend for Maverick, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good bad weekend, if that makes sense, isn't it? It's if that's the worst, if that's a bad weekend for him, then great. And I think that's what we've always said, haven't we? And everyone's known Aprilia needs consistency over the season. And so if this is a low, if a bad weekend is a 3rd and a 5th, well, hey, that's great. And if he can get back to winning form, obviously Barcelona was a dream event for Aprilia last year. So if they can take the wins when they become available, and then stay in that sort of 3rd to 5th top 5 sort of range on their tougher events, shall we say? Yeah, I mean that's great. I think Maverick, 3rd place in the sprint, and he had high hopes for the Grand Prix. I think there was a few sort of front tire pressure issues, maybe something like that, but by no means a disaster at all. As you say, 5th place, good solid points, and I think at this stage of the season, that's mission accomplished. When you're in an event where the Ducatis, as we said, have not got the chatter, they're looking fast. You've got to take as many points as you can, and that's pretty much what he did.
Yep, and Rob, I'd say it's probably the first weekend that we've seen both Aprilias kind of be matched in terms of the results. They were, at least Espargaro and him in the sprint, they were 3rd and 5th. Maverick, of course, was 5th yesterday, but at least was 9th. But there was incidents with Enea Bastianini there. Would you say, you're like, finally, this is the weekend where you can kind of see both Aprilias, deliver where they should be, really?
Yeah, to Pete's point, I think it was a good bad weekend for Vinales, and again he's continued. He's been very strong throughout this season, and it was good to see that. But it was also good to see Aleix, who we don't know what's going to happen with his future, whether he's going to stay at Aprilia, retire, to sort of be back in the mix. You know, he was sort of pushed wide by Bastianini and it sort of ruined his race. But even before that, he had that bizarre drop for a couple of laps where he was in the mix, third place, and it seemed like he was going to be in the battle, potentially for the win, but at least for the podium. And then a few things happened and he sort of drifted down the order, which was a shame for Aleix. If there's any saving grace for Espargaro, it's that Catalunya is next.
Yeah.
The Aprilia should be very strong. He obviously did the double there last season. And you would expect, because of the type of circuit it is, and he goes very, very well on low grip circuits, that he should be able to deliver something at his home race, obviously from Barcelona, so he's going to want to do well. He's going to want to do well because a bit like Ducati, his future and Aprilia have sort of said Mugello time is when we need to know, we need to make a decision, because they're also not going to want to miss out on a potential Bastianini or a Martin, whatever happens with Ducati. So, you know, Ducati is going to be the domino that falls, but Aprilia, you know, in a way, have their own domino that needs to fall in terms of what they're going to do. And I think for Aleix, these next two rounds, Catalunya and Mugello, are going to be pivotal in terms of what he's going to decide to do. So good to see him back on form. Not quite the result in the Grand Prix he would have wanted, but he did have a very good sprint at a track that he does go well at. So I think it was good to see Aprilia consistent. They weren't quite quick enough, but at least they were consistent, which has always been the sort of issues they've been having.
Yeah, do you know, I agree. It was just kind of a relief, to be honest, to see both of them there. And like, I'm like, finally we can kind of see what they can both do. And it was I'd say, obviously it wasn't a brilliant weekend for them, but that bike is still just it's a great bike to have. And like you say, when it gets to the hotter tracks and lower grip, I think the next race is going to be really crucial. I think if, say, Aleix maybe wins one of the races, I think a decision maybe might come out then from him. I think he will tell people what he's going to do. Who knows if it's going to be retirement or it'll be just going to be a test rider role. But I think, that result will give both them riders a lot of confidence, especially after what happened in Jerez. So who knows what will happen with Aprilia at Catalunya. They could just completely disappear up the road and they could do what they done last year, but we'll wait and see. KTM, Pete, it was I would say, not a disastrous weekend, but it wasn't what they expected. You know, we'll start with Pedro Acosta on the gas. It was how can I say, it was a learning weekend for him, a circuit where I told you the stat where he's crashed out of he's crashed in every single race he's had at Le Mans, and he wins the next race after, so I don't know what's going to happen there. But he crashed out of the Grand Prix, and it was just a bit of maybe inexperience. Came a long way back on the brakes, didn't he? And just lost the front at turn 8.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? Yeah, I mean, you know, his first, I mean, I think up to that point, he'd be the only rider to score points in every race.
Points,
is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, it was going to happen at some stage. You know, as a rookie, you're gonna crash out of a race at some time. But yeah, as you say, it just turns out to be the one event that he's crashed out of in every year of his Grand Prix career. He did finish sixth in the sprint, I think it was. So he has seen a checkered flag at Le Mans now, at least. And top KTM again, I think probably for most of the weekend. So he had the speed. I think he was another to suffer a bit in qualifying, wasn't he? Back on the third row, starting there somewhere 7th or something.
Yeah.
You know, which didn't help his efforts. He got sort of the opposite of Marquez. He didn't really gain ground, did he, in the opening laps? So then he had a lot of room to, places to make up, and as you say, just pushed a little bit hard to try and overtake a couple of riders at the same time and slid between them. Fortunately, he didn't take anyone down with him. But the
perfect size gap, wasn't it? It was like the KTM size.
Yeah, it was perfectly choreographed, wasn't it? To just slide between. Was it the Aprilia and the VR46?
Yeah.
But I mean, but the speed was there. I mean, that's the other thing to say. And I think, he'll shrug that off. Obviously, disappointment because it was Tech 3's home event. A lot of support for the team and by association Acosta. So not what he would have wanted, obviously. But the speed was there. I guess a bit like with Fabio Quartararo. If you're going to crash, you'd rather crash being competitive than, I don't know, 12th or 13th or something. So a learning experience. As we've said with all these guys this year, the important thing is that you bounce back at the next round, isn't it? And the next round happens to be another home event for Acosta. So let's see what he does next time out.
Exactly. And staying with KTM, Rob, Brad Binder, it was I think it was the worst weekend he's ever had in MotoGP. There were so many crashes on Friday. He had 3 crashes. qualifying went to absolute. It was a disaster essentially with that bike. The electronics, it seemed that on that first bike just didn't work, and he couldn't get a lap time in, so he was starting from the very back. And then the sprint wasn't any better. But the Grand Prix, actually, do you know what? I'll give Binder, it was a 22nd to 8th place. It was actually a really good ride. In the end, he kind of salvaged something for a bit of confidence heading into Barcelona.
Absolutely. It's disappointing for Binder, though. 2 months from now, he was second in Qatar, looking like a title contender. And I don't think any of us would have expected this sort of drop off in terms of what's happened. He obviously had an issue with his ankle. But it's just, and Acosta's performances have, overshadowed the factory team, but a very disappointing sort of run of results. He was extremely quick in the race, especially early on. He was lapping similar to the Ducatis at the front.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very good comeback ride. We know Binder on a Sunday, he'll always produce something, but to go from last to 8th was very, very impressive. And he did, like you say, salvage something out of a very bad weekend. He already had the sort of unwanted hat-trick on Friday of crashing 3 times, that issue in qualifying. And you could tell Binder was just, he wasn't quite himself. He was, sort of upset in the garage in qualifying with what was happening, as with any rider, in fairness, when you're not able to put in any laps. And sort of, he already knew at that point he was struggling throughout the weekend and is trying to make up time. Disappointing, though, because, when Binder's having a bad weekend, they haven't really got Jack Miller to perform. He had a crash, didn't really understand why. So they're really, really struggling. And again, I go back to Qatar. It's something we would have had we could not expect this to have happened with both riders, but especially Binder to have been so strong. And then his season in a very, in 5 rounds has just tailed off completely. The upcoming rounds, Barcelona could be a struggle for KTM. We're not too sure. Mugello hasn't always been their best track. So it might be a little bit more pain for Binder and KTM before they sort of maybe Sachsenring, just before the summer break, they're able, and Assen maybe to come back into the mix. But good Grand Prix for Binder, but still not the result he or KTM want.
Yeah, I agree. It's just one of those weekends. It just seems to be, it's been like that for the past maybe 3 Grand Prix, hasn't it, Pete, where something just hasn't clicked with that factory team. Yeah, Jack Miller had a good sprint. He was the only rider to actually pick, I think it was a soft front on the Saturday, and it paid off. He finished in the 8th place, got a good result in the sprint, but the Grand Prix yesterday, it seemed like he didn't really know why he crashed, did he? It was just, it kind of sums up Jack's season, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, he saw nothing on the data. The team said, look, Jack didn't do anything wrong. Maybe it was the wind or something. It seems like the wind was a bit stronger in the race. Maybe they're all going with the hard front tyre, as you say. Jack also went over to that for the Grand Prix, didn't he? So maybe that just made things a bit more on the limit as far as the front end. Again, is it this chatter thing? Are the KTM guys suffering with this more in recent rounds? Even Acosta seems to have had some of it. It certainly seems to be limiting them a bit in terms of their potential, their lap time, their speed. Exactly how much it's bothering them, we're not sure, because they're sort of a bit tight-lipped about it. But it does seem that since Qatar, they have started to struggle with the chatter in the same way that Ducati have. But Ducati looked to have put it behind them in the recent rounds, and it's still an issue at KTM. Even with the Jerez test, it sounded like they didn't really solve the issue there. So, that's going to be a big thing for them to get on top of, at least as far as getting a few more tenths out of the bike and moving them forward on the grid. But at the end of the day, Acosta is up there, isn't he? He's on the bike. He's their saving grace at the moment in many ways. If Acosta wasn't there, we'd be saying, well, what's happened to the KTM? And, it's not capable of fighting at the front. But Acosta's showing that the bike has the speed. But it's trying to get that performance window or stay in that performance window, I think, is what Miller's explained. It's really tricky. The rear tyre has a lot more grip this year, but getting the most from it seems it takes something different, maybe different lines, different riding style, that kind of thing. And they're still sort of trying to work it out. But as Rob said, when you saw the results in Qatar, you thought KTM are really going to be on it this year. But maybe the chatter issues for Ducati sort of flattered the other manufacturers a bit. And once those are cleared, we're now seeing the true speed of the Ducati, and the other guys are catching up a little bit. So, yeah, early on, as we say, we're only 25% through the season. There's a lot of points still left, but as you say, it's not good to be continually dropping back, is it?
It's not, and Binder's been so strong over the past few seasons. It's just, I didn't expect it, and it's just one of those seasons maybe where he'll get stronger as it gets further into the year. They figure out issues, but yeah, Not KTM's best weekend, but I expect them to bounce back in Barcelona. I think something, maybe they'll find something as well at the Mugello test. Who knows? We'll see there. But French Grand Prix, French riders, Fabio Quartararo, a beautiful livery, I must say. I love that special livery that Yamaha let him use. Personally, I think you should let them use it every single race. I think it's so different. It's a bit of character in there. MotoGP needs that. But in the Grand Prix, that beautiful livery went through the gravel trap and it just got ruined, which is terrible for Fabio. But Robbie did say a good thing. He'd rather be fighting inside the top 10 than rather be in 14th, So he did actually look pretty quick this weekend at certain points, didn't he?
Yeah, I think just about the livery, the best thing about Sunday for Yamaha was the livery, and then the worst thing on Sunday was the livery by the end of it. But Quartararo, I mean, already his performance in qualifying, yes, he's got that adoring French crowd who were out in numbers to support him, which was great to see. They're obviously a very passionate crowd, and Quartararo deserves that. He's a world champion and is a phenomenal rider and is going through a very difficult period. But his performance in qualifying and even practice, he was always on it. It's a circuit that naturally means that lap times are going to be close. But there was some laps, especially on Saturday morning, where he was matching a lot of the Ducatis, especially in the middle part of the circuit.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of pace. And then, like he said, what's the point of trying to salvage, 2 or 3 points when you could be up there, at least fighting with bikes that are quicker, trying to learn from them. And then, obviously, you're on your limit every lap, so a crash is always possible. But for Quartararo, he would rather see that. I think we would rather see him push flat out, push like we know he can, try and be in the mix with an Aleix Espargaro or a Di Giannantonio, and then crash out. It's obviously not the result he would have wanted, but great to see. I think we have seen a little bit of a step from Yamaha this weekend. Not so much on Rins' side of the garage. Some of that is probably Quartararo being in front of his home crowd, but I think Quartararo was, in general, very, very good this weekend. And I think the M1 did seem to make a little step forward, as opposed to Honda, who have, were basically back of the grid again. But I think for Quartararo, a lot of positives going forward, and he's obviously gone very well at Catalunya in the past, so hopefully he can try and continue that into the next round.
He has, yep. I did expect him to be quick. Something just, that home crowd gives you, as they say, like Nigel Mansell used to sit in F1 and give him like 5 temps when he used to race in front of British crowds. It gives them something extra, and I think that Quartararo was very impressive. And yeah, I expect him to be more of the same in Barcelona. But then looking just at Johan Zarco and the Hondas, Zarco finished in 12th, Pete, for the Grand Prix, got points, but they were just anonymous. Joan Mir had, I think, a very good Grand Prix until he crashed out. He was just inside the points, and he was really hanging on to that group. There was a big gap between where he was and the other Hondas before he crashed out. But they were just, that's the word for me, they were just very anonymous, weren't they, this weekend?
I think they were kind of braced for another difficult event, weren't they? Because basically what they tried at the Jerez test hadn't worked. The Bradle bike didn't work, did it? So they were using the same bike as they had for the Spanish Grand Prix, the standard bike, if you like, and they knew there's not going to be any miracles. And that's what we saw, wasn't it? But as you say, Joan Mir, I think, impressed a lot of the other Honda riders as well. Certainly Marini said, what he did in the race was pretty impressive to be, fighting up there. And okay, he crashed out again, a bit like what Rob was saying with Quartararo. At least you're up there. At least you're making a bit of progress. You can see something happening. And Mir seemed quite downbeat over the weekend. So to actually have a fairly positive race, let's keep it in perspective, but at least to be somewhere where you can see the top 10, I think that was better than they thought, and maybe they can take some clues from that. Some big private tests coming up, or a couple of days. I think the Yamaha and Honda are testing. I think one of them's testing for 2 days, one of them only 1 day at Mugello, but they'll obviously be trying some new parts now ahead of Catalunya. And then, as you mentioned previously, there's the official Mugello test after the Italian Grand Prix. So there's 2 tests coming up in the next few weeks. That's when they'll, both Honda and Yamaha will want to see some real progress because, as we've said, Mir tried something at the Jerez test that wasn't the Bradle bike. It was something else, maybe an engine modification, something like that he did like. And they're waiting for something more in that direction. Let's see if that arrives in the near future. Quartararo tried the chassis, I think, this weekend, didn't like it, didn't seem to use it. But then they've got this test coming up, and he tried something in warm-up, it seems, a massive change, he called it, on the bike. And the engineers were kind of like, this is going to be huge. And he said, no, it's actually a little bit better. It wasn't the radical change that the engineers expected, and he actually liked it, and I think raced with it. So again, Rob was saying maybe they've found something this weekend that they could work on, and that could well be another direction they can take. And it just sums up maybe this riskier approach that Yamaha's now taking, where they are going outside of their established settings, shall we say, and trying to see, right, how does the bike work if we do something really weird with the setting? And he liked it. So, and the fact he raced with it says it all. They've now got race data from it, and let's see what they now try at the Mugello test. If they can bring those parts to the upcoming rounds, and aero will obviously be a key part of that as well, I would think.
Yeah, and Carl Crutchow's going to have plenty of fun with that. I can imagine trying to test different things, and let's be honest, Carl will give you a straight answer if it's good or not. So I wish I was inside the Yamaha box whenever he comes back in after doing a few laps. But yeah, that's the French Grand Prix for MotoGP. I just want to touch on Moto2 Moto3 quickly, Rob. Moto2, first time since Valencia 2013 that we have actually seen no Calixes on the podium, which is an end of an amazing run for them. We've had 3 Boscoscuros, Sergio Garcia winning from his teammate Ayagura and Alonso Lopez on the podium. How good have they been at the start of the year, just the Boscoscuros? Because they seem a level above the Calix, don't they?
They do. They've been brilliant. We obviously expected Fermin Aldeguer on that bike to be extremely strong, and he was obviously the fourth Boscoscuro yesterday. Yeah. Sergio Garcia has been incredible this season, and I think he's taken over the championship lead again with that win, and a dominant win. Joe Roberts obviously fourth, keeping himself in contention, but good to see Ayagura back where he belongs. Obviously 2022 when he had that title challenging season against Fernandez. But the Boscoscuro is a very, very good bike. We've always known it to be a good bike, but to maybe be track specific at times. But it seems to be now as what the Calix was, the overall package. I think that's what they've sort of merged into, is not just having a bike that a rider can go quickly on. Maybe Alonso Lopez is quick one weekend, then it's Aldeguer. They've got 4 very good riders, but 4 bikes that are producing weekend after weekend, and the Calix has sort of fallen back, something we've not expected. I mean, you threw out the stat. It's an amazing ridiculous stat. It's not one that Calix would like to hear, but I guess that had to come to an end at some point, and the Boscoscuro is a very, very competitive package. And I think it's safe to say maybe Joe Roberts can be up there by the end of the season, but a world champion on a Boscoscuro, I think, is a very, very high possibility in Moto2 this season.
Yeah, and it's just trying to work out who it will be, because they're all so strong. Ayagura had a fantastic race yesterday. I think it was 15th or 17th. I think it was 15th. He made 13 places to finish second. And actually, staying on Moto2, I want to give a shout out to Aaron Canet. Coming back after that injury to do what he done, hobbling about. He was so strong in the race. He got mugged at the end, essentially. But, just shows the dedication of these riders, and I think he deserves a lot of credit, so he does. But lastly, Moto3, David Alonso, Pete, I think when I watch these Moto3 riders, they're just, how can they keep getting better and better? But he is just a last lap god, to be honest. Like, he just knows how to place himself in the right position at the right time, and to be so young to understand how to do that in his career, what a talent he is.
Yeah, he's sort of marking himself out as the next big thing, isn't he? And I think there'll be, I'm sure there'll be some MotoGP team bosses that are already watching what he's doing. And to beat Danny Holgado, who, riding for the home Tectoir team as well, all that, he had plenty of motivation to win that race, is the point I'm making. And Alonso got it done again, as you say. He knows how to win a battle. And he's marking himself out as the guy to beat, isn't he?
He is, yeah. And I think Moto3, what I think is done this year, Rob, the Pirellis have actually made it a far better class to watch. It's not, the riders aren't just taking their brains out and just going absolutely crazy for 18 laps. They're actually having to play with the tire a bit more and save, and you're getting smaller groups of maybe 5 at the front, and you're seeing a lot more quality racing, which is ultimately what you want for a lower class, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. What it's actually doing is now allowing these younger riders to strategize a bit more. To not just, like you said, maybe take out the brain, 20 laps of just banging bars and just chaos. I mean, it was still a very close ending. I think 4 riders within half a second.
Yep.
But David Alonso is sort of, there's shades of Acosta in his riding and how he's able to strategize and calculate his way to the front and how he's sort of managing on the last lap. He's a very, very smart rider, and he's producing. He seems to just always have a little bit more than the riders around him, even though it might be a close race come the end. He's able to just find a little bit more. But I think it's great to see these young riders still riding on natural instinct, but at the same time strategizing a bit more, understanding the tires, playing around with the grip, knowing when they need to save, how much they can push. It's those sort of things that are going to make them adapt to MotoGP even quicker. So I think that transition to the Pirellis has done wonders for that.
Absolutely. And the final question I have, I want one word answer from both of you. Who would Ducati sign in 2025 to be Pecco Bagnaia's teammate? Pete, one word answer. Who's it going to be?
I'm going to say Martin.
Okay. We'll expand on that in the next podcast. Rob, who's your one word answer pick for that?
Marquez.
Okay. Mine, Marc Marquez. If you enjoyed the podcast, we'll see you next week for another episode. If you enjoyed it, give us a 5-star review. Apple Podcast, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast. On the YouTube channel, give us your prediction for the Ducati 2025 seat. Love reading them. So many different answers. Subscribe, comment, like, do whatever you want. Just be nice. And we will see you next time.